Good morning and welcome to our Friday morning live stream here offered in Empty Cloud Monastery in New Jersey. Hope that anyone who's watching this live is doing well and that anyone who's watching this after it's been recorded is also doing well and finding lots of peace and having a happy, healthy life. And so today we are going to be looking at a sutta, one of the discourses of the Buddha, and studying that, just reading through it, and I'll be offering a few reflections and comments on the sutta today so that it can be clarified to whatever extent that I'm able to. And so I see a few people joining in online. I see hellos and Anjali from Julie, Geeta, and also Meredith. So hello to all of you and anyone else who might be joining in live right now. Also, cows are friends and Manal. Good. Well, so today we'll be, as I said, looking at a sutta. And this sutta is called the Karajakāyasutta. You should be able to find it in the description of the video. And it is Anguttara Nikaya 10.219. So 10.219. So it's relatively far down in the list of suttas in the Anguttara Nikaya. And so I will begin by rendering homage to the Buddha 3 times, and then we can, after doing our chanting, we can go ahead and begin our sutta discussion. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ Dhammaṃ Sanghaṃ Saranam Gacchāmi. And hello also to a few other people who've sent in comments live, from Madeline, Gregory, and Maria. Okay, so we'll begin with reading our sutta. So I'll go ahead and begin reading. The Buddha says, "Mendicants, I don't say that intentional deeds that have been performed and accumulated are eliminated without being experienced. And that may be in this very life, or in the next life, or in some subsequent period. And I don't say that suffering is ended without experiencing intentional deeds that have been performed and accumulated." And so we can pause here, and this is really the a very striking statement, or a few striking statements at the beginning of the sutta that the Buddha is giving, and so I think it's worth a few comments. And so the Buddha is saying, he says he does not say that intentional deeds that have been performed and accumulated are eliminated without being experienced. Right, so there's a few, it can be a little bit confusing, right? You have many negatives here. So what does this mean? Well, what the Buddha is saying is that in this sutta, it's saying that intentional deeds that have been performed and accumulated, meaning the karma that we've done, right? Any intentional actions that we've taken, they must be experienced. The results of those must be experienced in order to eliminate them. So what the Buddha is saying here is that it's not possible to eliminate the intentional deeds that one has already done in the past through some other means. They have to bear fruit. That's the only way to remove them, or to allow them to cease, right? So he's saying in order for them to cease, they have to be experienced. The results of those deeds has to be experienced. So that means that it's not possible, for example, to you do a kind of ritual purification to remove the karma, right? So, for example, in some cultures and religions and spiritual practices, people might do some kind of ritual bathing, right? They might bathe in water in order to remove the sins and the bad deeds that they've done in the past. But famously, there's maybe it's actually not so famous, but it does come up a few times. But there's one story of a bhikkhuni, so a female monk, a disciple of the Buddha, and she saw a Brahmin doing this. And the Brahmin said that he was washing away his sins in the river. So I believe it was in the Ganges or another river. And he was washing away his sins. And she said, well, if that's the case, then the fish and the turtles are going to definitely go to heaven because they're in the water all the time. And, that was surprising to hear, I imagine, for him. And so, she said, well, if you want to purify your sins, you should just not have done the bad things in the first place. That's the way to do it. So just stop doing whatever you're trying to get rid of it. If you don't do it, then you won't have to get rid of it later on. And so, what is the point? The point of that teaching? The point is that by going into water, we can't remove what we've done. The only way to not experience bad things is to not do the causes of those things, right? And this should be rather obvious when we think about it, because you have to remember that karma, our intentional deeds, the law of cause and effect in the moral dimension, it's not mystical or magical, right? It is very difficult for us to comprehend, on a full scale. The Buddha says that it's really unthinkable to understand all the workings and details of kamma for someone who's not essentially a Samma Sambuddha. However, the basic of it is relatively clear, and so you can understand this on a physical dimension, right? So, for example, let's say that you walk up to a high story of a building. Maybe you take the stairs or the elevator, and you go to the top floor of a building, and then you think, oh, if only I could get down there. If I could only go back down to the bottom of the building. I wish I hadn't done all this work getting up here. I want to be back down again. I want to go down to the ground. So how would you get to the ground? Can you pray and then magically teleport to the bottom, or can you, rinse yourself in water to wash away all the actions that you did, taking yourself up to the top of the building, all the effort that you expended in order to get there, however much it was? Can you wash away the effort and the results of that effort in water? Can you pray it away? Can you wish it away? No, it's not possible, right? Once you've done the work, once you've worked your way up to a certain place, you're already there. It's not possible to undo that, right? What has been done, as we say, right? So once you've gone to the top of a building, the only way to get down is to start doing new actions. You start walking down the stairs. So you have to do all of the same work in reverse, right? So what that means is, that the action has to be taken. You can't remove the old action through special means. It's not mystical, right? It's very simple. When you walk to the top of a building, when you take the stairs, then once you're up there, you can't undo it. The only way to undo it is to do new actions, which lead you in a different direction. So when we do intentional deeds, that's how it is. When we do a good deed, when we do wholesome deeds, it's like we're walking in a good direction. And when we do unwholesome deeds, it's like we're walking in a bad direction towards a bad place. And once you've walked, say, 10 steps down the road, there's no way to teleport back. You have to take 10 steps back if you want to go back to the original place you started. So it's not a perfect example because our mind is more complicated than that. It's more subtle. But, once in the sense that some actions are stronger than others and the mind can be purified, and we'll talk about that. This sutta will actually talk about purifying your karma. But it's not to be done, the results wherever you've reached, you'll still face the consequences of that. So we'll talk about this in a moment, but for now we can stick with this image, right? And so the Buddha is saying, you have to experience the results. That's how you get rid of it. And then he says that may be in this very life or in the next life or in some subsequent period. So this is 3 types of kamma divided in terms of time. Kamma that's experienced in this life means that you do an action and you experience it in the very same life, right? So for example, maybe you do something and then in that very same life you experience the rewards. Maybe you might practice lots of meditation and generosity and uphold virtue, and maybe your health improves, maybe your lifespan improves, and so on. So that could be, for example, some kind of immediate karma ripening in that very life. That won't happen to everybody, but it's possible. Some people, they might start experiencing lots of good side effects, right? Maybe start experiencing more good circumstances and so on, and that might be the karma of their good deeds ripening in that very life. And then other types of deeds we do, they ripen in the next life, which means, for example, maybe you do certain deeds and then when you're reborn, it ripens in that next life when you're reborn. So maybe it ripens in the life that you take, or it ripens in the status of the life. So for example, the Buddha says that if you injure living beings, the result of that is having a shorter lifespan. And so, if I recall correctly, and so, for example, you might not experience that in this life, but someone who does a lot of harming and injuring and cruelty towards living beings, then in the next life, they might have a shorter lifespan. And so that's an example of karma that would ripen in the next life. So it's important to remember that this is not a one-to-one exact case. So some people, they might not experience it in the next life. Some people, they might not experience karma, a particular karma in this life. So it depends on the person. It depends on the many causes and conditions. It's not just like a single action will lead to a single result and you can calculate it. It's much more complicated than that. Because the state of your mind, both before you did the action, while you did the action, and after you did the action, as well as the particular circumstances that you have right now, right, because of your past deeds, all of that affects how the deed will ripen in the future. So the state of your mind in the past, present, and future, the type of intention, the strength of the intention, the circumstances of the intention, and also the vipaka that you're experiencing, the vipaka that you have now, and the vipaka that the past deeds that you have done, which will have their own vipaka. All of those factors, they all start accumulating. So it all adds up to many different. It's very complicated to measure what is the exact way that a karma will ripen. When you do an intentional deed, will it ripen in this life, the next life? Or the third option is some subsequent period. This means that it might ripen, even more than one life away. So you might do a deed, and you might not experience the results of that deed concretely until 2, 3 lifetimes, even more lifetimes. An example of this would be, for example, King Ajatasattu. It said that he killed his father. And so that's a very serious kamma. It's a very serious karma in Buddhism to kill. If someone kills their own father or mother and so on, it's very serious. It's said to send them straight. In the next life, they're going to a lower realm. They're going to hell, going to a hell realm. So it's one of those things which is considered, if not unavoidable, definitely, almost certainly, almost very much so. And so what that means then is, King Ajatasattu, after he did that, he actually did many good things, right? So he became a disciple of the Buddha, and he did a lot of good deeds. So it wasn't like his whole life was bad, right? It was, he did that bad deed, but he also did other good deeds. And so the point is that, in his next life, he probably almost certainly went to a hell realm. But after that life, after his hell realm, life was over, it's possible that in the third life, the fourth life, whatever, that he actually experienced so many good things because of the good deeds that he did. So it's not, he didn't experience per se the results of his good actions in his second life. His second life might have been a pretty bad one, but then after that, he might experience good results. So sometimes it takes time. And also it can be the opposite. You might do really good things, but you might have done bad things in the past that you don't even remember. And then those might not ripen until later on. And so sometimes it takes longer. So that's what the Buddha is saying. He's saying that karma, whenever you do a deed, in order for it to actually go away, the result, it'll have to ripen. Once it's been done, and the results of that will stick around. However, it might ripen in this life, in a second life, or in even later than that. And then he says, and I don't say that suffering is ended without experiencing intentional deeds that have been performed and accumulated. So this means that the Buddha is saying that in order to end suffering, in order to make suffering come to an end, all the deeds have to ripen. All the karma that you've done has to ripen. And this is a slightly strange statement. And some people, some scholars, and some people who have looked at this sutta, they think that maybe this statement is an error. Maybe it's not supposed to. Maybe it's not correct, because in the Jain view, for example, you typically, it's understood that you do have to, in my understanding of the Jain view at least, they believe that you do have to experience all the karma, meaning you really have to burn it all off. So that's why they do, for example, certain austere spiritual practices to burn off the karma. But from a Buddhist perspective, we're actually not trying to burn off karma. So the problem is not the karma, what's been done has been done, as we said, and it doesn't really need to be burned off in any particular way. We just need to change our mind in the present moment. So from a Buddhist perspective, what we focus on is not removing bad karma, but rather purifying and making good karma in the present. So we don't try to remove it, as the Buddha is saying, it's only removed when it ripens. So what matters is what we do in the present in order to shape our mind right now. That's what we do in Buddhism. In the Jain view, for example, they do a lot of practices in order to remove the bad karma, which is they perceive it as clinging to them. So they try to remove it. So it's less about, also they try to create good karma in the present, not accumulate karma in the present, but they also try to remove bad karma. From a Buddhist perspective, you don't need to try to remove the bad karma. Yeah, it's not really possible anyway. So you can only shape it in the present. And so some people say that it's strange that the Buddha is saying that karma has to be removed in order to end suffering. But I do think that there's another way of looking at this, which is a possible, more maybe Buddhist interpretation. And the way that you could look at this is that the Buddha is saying, in order for karma to end, it has to be ripe, it has to ripen, it has to be experienced. So let's say you do certain actions, and all those actions have to be experienced. So when the Buddha says make an end of suffering, I think what he's referring to is someone who doesn't get reborn anymore. So suffering, as I've mentioned many times, as is standard in Buddhism, the term dukkha, it really refers to like rebirth, often. It's not just a psychological suffering. So it's a kind of existential condition rather than just being upset or being stressed out. Those are components of dukkha. But when the Buddha says, make an end of dukkha, he's referring to someone who they end rebirth. So it's like when they're, all of the suffering of their life comes to an end. So that's really what he's kind of referring to. And so I think that in this place, what he's referring to is that before an arahant passes away, if someone ends the cycle of suffering, I think what he's saying is that before they pass away, all of their previous karma, it will have to ripen. They'll have to experience the results of it. So it might be very minor. It might not be experienced very strongly. And we will also look at that in the sutta later on when the Buddha is talking about this. So I think that that's a more accurate interpretation of this statement, is that the Buddha seems to be implying that even if someone becomes an arahant, they'll still have to experience the results of their karma. It's just that, as we'll see, it's not necessarily going to be very dramatic, right? Because it won't issue in rebirth. It will just issue in some kind of minor experience in their last life. Okay, so then we can move on to the next part of the discourse. So then the Buddha, he goes on, and it becomes more practical. So he starts giving some more practical instructions. And he says, that noble disciple is rid of desire, rid of ill will, unconfused, aware, and mindful. They meditate, spreading a heart full of love to one direction, and to the second, and to the third, and to the fourth. In the same way, above, below, across, everywhere, all around, they spread a heart full of love to the whole world, abundant, expansive, limitless, free of enmity and ill will. And so this is, referring to the practice of loving kindness, of metta, love, universal or unconditional love. And so the Buddha is saying that a disciple of the Buddha, a disciple of the Noble One, they remove desire and ill will from the heart, right? Those kind of very sticky and painful emotions, right? Painful mind states and pushing and pulling in the mind that makes us more confused and more agitated. So he's saying, with someone who, if they remove that desire and that ill will, that aversion, and they become unconfused, so clear-minded, right? Very, not cloudy or foggy-minded, but clear-minded. They become very aware and mindful. Then they spread a heart full of love to all the directions, universally. So they attain a abundant, expansive, limitless mind state, which has no enmity or ill will, no hatred or no hostility, right? So that he's referring to someone who has a very beautiful and exalted mind state. So they spread a heart full of love above, below, across, everywhere, all around. They spread a heart full of love to the whole world. And this is found in the Metta Sutta, where the Buddha says, Sabbe Satta Sukhitatta. So may all beings be at well. May all beings be at ease. May all beings be happy in themselves. So that's referring to that practice, right? And in this practice, we can really start with just something very simple, just, reflecting in our mind, may I be well and happy, may I be safe, and then may they be happy, may they be safe, may they have well-being in themselves. And so you can try to develop that intention within our heart, try to spread that within ourselves, and it's for our benefit and for the benefit of others. So that's what he's referring to, but he's referring to it at someone who attains it on a deeper level. And he says that they understand that formerly their mind was limited and undeveloped, but now their mind has become limitless and well-developed. Whatever limited deeds they've done don't remain or persist there. He says, what do you think, mendicants? Suppose a child had developed the heart's release by love from their childhood on. Would they still do any bad deed? Would they do any bad or unwholesome deed? The monks say, no, sir. And the Buddha says, not doing any bad deed, would they still experience any suffering? No, sir. For if they don't do any bad deed, from where would suffering afflict them? And the Buddha says, the heart's release by love should be developed by women or men. For neither women nor men take this body with them when they go. The mind is what's inside mortal beings. They will understand whatever bad deeds they've done in the past with this deed-born body, they will experience here in that life. It will not follow them to the next life. The heart's release by love, developed in this way, leads to non-return for a wise mendicant here who has not penetrated to a higher freedom. So we can pause, right? So what is he saying? So he's saying that someone who develops an expansive mind of loving kindness, a very profound, loving, and expansive mind, then they reflect that before their mind was limited and undeveloped. Limited in the sense that, it had maybe kindness towards some beings, but hatred and ill will towards others. Or sometimes it would be averse, but, sometimes it would be kind of more in a kind, calm state. So it wasn't very developed. It wasn't very expansive like the ocean. It wasn't very exalted like the vast sky. And so he's saying that however, then they realize that when they attain that deep, profound state, then they reflect that their mind is limitless and well-developed. It has no limits, right? Every single direction, they have that kindness, that love towards all beings, not just some beings. Their mind becomes not small, but very big and vast. And it becomes very supple and very gentle and very subtle. And so their mind is well-developed, right? It's very trained, it's very tame, very calm. And so they reflect then that whatever limited deeds they've done, so whatever deeds they did with a limited mind, they won't remain or persist in that place of vast, expansive mind, right? When the mind is like the ocean, then all those limited, tiny deeds, like that moments of irritation or moments of greed, right? None of that can persist in someone who has a vast, expansive mind. And so what this means is that, as he says later on, what they understand that whatever bad deeds they've done in the past, they will experience in that life, and that they won't follow them to the next. So in other places, the Buddha gives a simile for this, where he says that the mind is like a lake of water. So kind of paraphrasing the simile, what he says is that the mind is like water. And so if you have a handful of salt, and you put that handful of salt in a cup of water, so if you had a cup, right, like this size, and you put the handful of salt in this cup, and you added water to it, then you drank it, how would it taste? It would taste very salty. It would be very salty because there's not very much water in there. So half salt, half water is very salty. However, imagine that you had a whole lake, right, a vast lake of fresh water, and you added the exact same salt into the fresh water. So the exact same salt, it's the exact same amount, but you added it into a big, vast lake of fresh water. And then you scooped up some of the water from the lake and you drank it. How would it taste? And it would not taste salty, right? You probably wouldn't even know that salt was added in there. because there's so much water that dilutes the salt, because the water is much more vast, much more expansive, much more limitless than a just limited tiny cup of water. And so the salt is the bad deeds that we do. It's the deeds that we do, the intentional actions, right? By body, speech, and mind. And so the point is that when we do bad deeds, if our mind is very limited, if we have a very limited, undeveloped mind, like a mind that tends towards badness, tends towards being constricted and tight and agitated, then that bad that we do, it'll be very, very salty, right? We'll taste it. But if we have a very limitless mind, if we develop our mind to become more expansive and spacious, right, so that we start including other beings, we start including, ourselves and everyone into a more vast and spacious mind, a more kind and loving mind, then even if they've done bad deeds in the past, well, those bad deeds they will still be there, right? Just like the salt is in the lake, but the taste of them, meaning the results of them, will be very, very limited, very, very small. And so they will just experience them, in that life. And if they pass away with a mind like that, they will go to a vast exalted realm, right? A realm that corresponds to a vast exalted loving mind. So to a heavenly realm. So limited deeds, they can't persist in that small, right? So it's like when you try to punch the air or try to paint on the sky, it doesn't work, right? Because the sky is limitless. It doesn't have limits to paint on it. Or the air, you can't kind of break through it, right, through hitting it. So it's the same. If someone has a vast mind, then little, bad actions, they won't really affect them very much, right? That when they ripen, they will experience them in a very limited way. And so the Buddha, before, he's saying that we have to experience the results of our deeds, but the way that we experience those results might change, right? If you have a very limited mind, it will be more painful, more salty. But if you have a vast, expansive mind, it will be less painful and it will be more quick, right? And he gives this reflection, right? He says, what do you think? Suppose a child had developed the hearts released by love from their childhood on. Would they still do any bad deed? So the point is, just imagine if people had developed from childhood a heart of expansive, loving kindness, including everyone, and their mind was well developed and peaceful and kind, then they would not do any bad. They wouldn't have done any bad deeds. So that's what we can reflect, right? Sometimes we see people doing unskillful things, or maybe we reflect on our own unskillful deeds, and then we think about, the pain that causes, and it can be frustrating to see people causing suffering to others, or frustrating to think that we've done bad things. But actually think, well, if we just make our mind rid of anger, of irritation, rid of greed and desire, very small, self-centered mind, then if we make our mind more expansive and vast, then actually it's not possible to do those bad things. And those bad things will be purified, right? In the sense that they won't arise within that mind. There won't be the danger of them arising so long as that mind persists, right? So you don't have to worry about bad things if the mind is kind and loving and expansive. It's only when the mind is more limited that then it becomes a problem, because then it's more likely that the mind will react, right? The Buddha has another simile of this, and he says that some people, they have a mind like an open sore. So whenever you poke it, it's incredibly painful and it reacts very strongly. So it's like some people, their mind is like an open sore. So, just a little word and they get irritated, they get agitated. Or, it can be also with greed, maybe just a little thing and they get very greedy or very self-centered. And so he's saying we shouldn't have a mind like that, right? And likewise, another example of this, of that limited mind, the Buddha says that some people, when someone does something to them, like someone harms them or hurts them, it's like their mind is like stone. It's like etching into stone. So it stays there for a long, long time, right? So you can, for a long time, you'll be able to see that. If someone writes their name in stone, you can see it in there for many, many years, right? It'll take a long time for this stone to be worn away. He says other people, their mind is more like maybe sand, I think. So when you write in sand, you can actually still see it in the sand, right? But very easily, that's the doorbell, very easily that it will be wiped away, right? When the tide comes in, for example, on a beach, it'll be gone. It might just be a few minutes, right? A few moments. And so some people, someone harms them, someone says something mean to them, or they experience some suffering in their life, and it's like sand. So, it sticks in their mind and they kind of linger on it, but eventually they allow it to be wiped away relatively quickly, relatively easily. And some other people's mind is like water, right? When you write in water, you can see it just for a moment and it just dissipates very quickly. You can't even write a whole word in water, right? You can only write maybe like one part of a letter. And so some people, when you say something, their mind, it picks it up, but just very quickly it's gone. They let it go, they don't cling to it. And then we could even say some people's mind is like space. You can't even write in space, even for a moment. You can't even write in space. Even just the very, just trying to poke space, just try to get one little nit, kind of mark in there, even for a moment, it's not possible. And so someone who has a perfectly developed mind, their mind is like space. So abuse and attack and insulting and suffering and violence, that doesn't affect them. It doesn't stick. They don't hold on to grudges. They don't hold on to resentment, right? They don't hold on to ill will towards people. They don't hold on to their self-centered conceptions or pride and so on, right? So that sense of vast, spacious openness, right? That open-heartedness can be developed. And so that's what we're talking about here. That's the benefits of developing that loving kindness in that vast, exalted way. The benefits are that it changes your karma in the future, right? The bad that you've done, it'll be ripened in a much more minimal way. And also in the present moment, you won't do bad things, right? And your mind won't stick to grudges. And so this is a danger that we have to watch out for, right? Sometimes people might say something to us, or often nowadays it's very common that people get upset about what's happened in their childhood. They blame their parents for maybe certain things that the parents did, or certain suffering that they experienced. But we must remember, friends, we don't want to have a mind like stone, right? So even if we've had unskillful parents or unskillful friends and guardians, or unskillful role models in our life, well, we want to have a mind like water, like space, not like stone. And so we can, just remember, actually, it's painful to hold on to those things, right? We don't want to have a mind like a sore, like an open sore. So it's much more peaceful for ourselves and also peaceful for others. So we are the first ones to benefit when our mind is loving. So you might say, well, if I'm kind towards everyone, if I'm very vast, then maybe people will, take advantage of me or walk all over me. Or maybe they don't deserve it, they should be punished. But actually, the more love that we have in the world, the less anger, hatred, and cruelty and so on, that's less problems, right? So sometimes more money, more problems. Well, less hatred, less problems, right? There's one less person who's going to cause suffering. So that's good, right? The sum total of suffering will be less when we're more kind. So even if we don't think people deserve it, also we deserve it, right? We deserve not to suffer. We deserve not to hold resentment. We deserve not to hold grudges. And so we deserve that, right? So even if we feel they don't deserve it, actually we're the ones who will be suffering. The Buddha says that when we're angry, our enemies can rejoice because they can reflect, oh, now they're suffering. They're very tense, very tight, very uncomfortable. And now they're, what I did to them is always going to stick in their mind. They can't let go of it. So I've really left a mark in there. So the Buddha says when we're very angry and resentful, our enemies should be happy. They can be happy, right? But instead, when we're very kind and forgiving and loving, actually our enemies will be upset because whatever they do to us, it doesn't bother us. And whatever they've done in the past, we let it go. And so actually, when we're kind and loving, even if we feel they don't deserve it, they do, right? They deserve it because we deserve it, right? And also they deserve it because when people cause harm, when people do bad, or when we do bad, as the Buddha says, it comes from a limited mind. It comes from a restricted mind. It doesn't come from an expansive, peaceful mind. Right? So when people do bad things, it's from a bad mind. One of the stories I've heard about this is a story of a crocodile, right? It's just kind of almost like a fable. And the crocodile is at the lake, and all the other animals want to come to drink the water. But whenever they get near, the crocodile gets angry, and it scares them away and wants to eat the animals. But one day, a tiny little mouse goes up to the crocodile, and they jump into the crocodile's mouth and pull out one of the crocodile's teeth. And then the crocodile is so happy because actually the reason that the crocodile was getting angry at all the animals, eating them and getting agitated was because it had a toothache, very strong toothache. So once the tooth was pulled out, the crocodile was actually very peaceful and calm, right? So why was the crocodile so mean? Why was it so cruel? Well, because it was in pain. And if sometimes you might be around people in pain, or maybe you're around yourself, right? Maybe when you're sick, you get very grumpy. So actually, it's the same with mental pain, right? When we hold mental pain, when we are hurting inside, maybe we feel alone, or we feel rejected, or we don't feel that love, or we don't feel like we are satisfied in our life, or we don't feel that we have the recognition that we deserve. So whenever there's that sense of lack, a sense of inner poverty, that sense of pain, right? Then actually people lash out with anger. They get angry. So then when people treat us badly, we remember, well, this is because of their suffering. Because what does the Buddha say? Again, if the mind was very expansive and vast, so if their mind was very peaceful, if their mind was very gentle, if their mind was like space and not like an open sore, they would never have done any bad things. It's not possible. So then you reflect like, oh, wow, every time that someone is doing bad, every time they're being cruel or mean or selfish or greedy or ignorant and deluded, it's because their mind is very limited. Their mind is like an open sore. So that must be so painful for them to be living in that state. It must be so uncomfortable. And so we can have compassion, right? That sense of wanting them to be free of suffering, wanting to help them however we can. And the first way we can start is by making sure that our mind is not like that too. And the Buddha says, the hearts released by love should be developed by women or men, for neither women nor men take this body with them when they go. The mind is what's inside mortal beings. So the mind is what the Buddha is saying here, right, is that it doesn't matter whatever your body looks like, whatever type of body you have, right? Any kind of body. The point is how you develop your mind, right? If someone has a very beautiful body but a very ugly mind, then there's not really much benefit to that, right? They only have a very limited benefit, maybe some recognition, but very quickly it will diminish. But if someone has a beautiful mind, no matter what their body looks like, old, young, male, female, or any other body, any type of body whatsoever, they'll be happy, they'll be peaceful. Other people will benefit from them. In their next life, they'll be happy and peaceful. So the benefits are really vast, right? Very expansive. So the benefits of a beautiful mind, of an expansive mind, those are what really matter. And so we should develop that practice, right? And then he closes, right? So again, repeating, he says that when someone has a mind like that, when their mind is expansive, then their karma, the limited karma, will ripen in that life. And afterwards, they'll be reborn in a higher Brahma realm. They'll be reborn in one of the realms of divinity, one of the realms of loving kind, of pure love, of pure compassion, of joy, and a vast, powerful, all-encompassing type of mind, right? So something like that. And so they'll be reborn in a very good place. So that means that the bad deeds they've done won't persist. They'll ripen. And then he says that the hearts released by love, developed in this way, it will lead to non-return for a wise mendicant who has not penetrated to a higher freedom. That means that someone who has wisdom, someone they understand the Dhamma to a deep level, they've penetrated the meaning of life, they've understood impermanence and so on, then if they have a very expansive mind, if they develop their mind like that, actually when they die, then they won't be reborn again in a lower realm. They'll only have one more life left. They won't return. So that's called a non-returner, right? Anagami. That means that they'll just be reborn in one more realm, and then they'll attain full liberation in that realm. They'll completely purify their mind in that realm if they don't attain to a higher freedom before they pass away. So that's that's a very good benefit. That means that if you develop your wisdom and you develop your expansive mind with the loving, the sublime abidings, or the divine abodes, the divine meditations, if you do that, then that has a lot of good benefits, right? You'll only have one more pleasant life before attaining awakening. Good. And so then the Buddha repeats this message with the other three Brahma Viharas, the other three divine meditations. So if someone spreads a heart full of compassion, karuna, that's seeing the suffering of the world and wishing may they be free, may they be released from that suffering. It's like a doctor, right? An ideal doctor who works to remove suffering of beings, remove the suffering, remove the pain. So compassion comes out of love. So what is metta? Metta is the wish that it's the non-aversion. It's the loving kindness towards beings. It's wanting beings to be sukhitatta, so wanting them to be sukhino, happy, to be happy, and keimino, being safe, wanting them to be protected and happy, joyful. And so that wish of just kindness, it's just like having kindness towards just like what you might feel towards a loved one, but without the desire and attachments and without the restrictions. So that sense of kindness, of wanting them to be happy, the pure part of that, of wanting people to be happy. Well, when you want people to be happy, out of that, then when you encounter suffering, naturally, then you start to develop that into a kind of compassion, right? When you love people, when you want them to be peaceful and safe, then you have compassion and you want to relieve their suffering. But compassion is not a strained mind state which gets upset at suffering, but it's an expansive mind state which allows, it kind of encompasses and embraces that suffering and then wants to transform it however it can. And then there's the heart of rejoicing. Rejoicing, this is the mind of joy. So sometimes, we can get jealous of people, or you can be discontent with your own circumstances, right? But actually a heart of mudita, a heart of rejoicing, is a heart that's just happy about people, just happy for them. It's like that sense of happiness for someone. So when we care for people and we want them to be happy, when they're suffering, the mind can develop compassion. And when they are experiencing happiness, the mind can rejoice and be, oh, I'm so happy for you, right? So mudita, unconditional rejoicing, is when no matter who the person is, you're happy for them. Like, oh, I'm so happy for you. That's what you want to feel. And so it's not conditional. One of the ways that I would call it is without a why. Can we have love without a why? So it's like, well, why would you love all beings, right? Why would you do that? Some of them you don't even know them, right? Most of them you don't know. Some of them might be unwholesome. They might be unskillful. They might be cruel, or they might be different from you. So why would you love them? Why would you care? There's really no reason other than just for the sake of caring for them, right? Because it's beautiful, because of the expansiveness of the mind. So there's really not a why. Like there's not like, oh, they did this for me, or because they're related to me, or because of this or that reason. So love without a why is love which is just because, just for the sake of it, in and of itself, love for love's sake. But of course, I'm not referring to romantic love here. So, it doesn't mean like, oh, you can go to the bar and then just find whoever you find, the first person that you meet and love them for love's sake. But we're talking about wanting all beings to be happy, right? Free of desire and ill will. And compassion. Why would you want all beings to be free of suffering? Some people, they want beings to suffer. Well, there's not a why, right? Just because of the expansiveness, the inclusiveness, the spaciousness. And then rejoicing. Why would you be happy for beings? Like, oh, I'm happy for you. I'm so happy for you. Maybe some beings, they're experiencing a lot of pain. Why would you be happy for them? Like, oh, I'm happy to see you. I'm rejoicing in your presence. Rejoicing just in you, just in your existence. Why would we rejoice in all beings? Well, because there's no why. Just because it's beautiful, because it makes the mind happy, right? Then you don't get jealous. Then you don't get dissatisfied with your life. Then you don't get upset at some and happy at others. So just happy for everyone, rejoicing in everyone, and your mind is very happy. So there's not a why per se, but because of the goodness of it. And then finally, equanimity, or equipoise, balance. They meditate spreading a heart full of equanimity to one direction, and to the second, and to the third, and to the fourth. In the same way, below, above, below, across, everywhere, all around, they spread a heart full of equanimity to the whole world, abundant, expansive, limitless, free of enmity and ill will. Equanimity is the impartiality, the balance. It's like the cool moon, which shines everywhere, but it's very peaceful and calm, right? It doesn't impose itself. And so equanimity is what we need to have with all the other three. It's like in order to have wanting everyone to be happy, then whether they harm you or they hurt you, whether they're good or bad, high or low, male or female, anything, then you want to have that impartiality, like that not being disturbed, not being perturbed, shaken, and flown and kind of turned about by the world, but rather that calm, equanimous, balanced mind. So equanimity is the kind of extraction of that principle of balance in every circumstance, of that peace, and not getting caught up in our likes and dislikes, not getting caught up in the past and the future, but allowing things to be as they are. And so that equanimity is the sense of balance. And so then they reflect again that their mind was limited and undeveloped, but when they practice that meditation, their mind becomes limitless and developed. And so whatever limited deeds they've done don't remain or persist in that mind state, right? There's no room for limited things in that vast mind state. And so this is the message of this sutta, friends. This is the message of the Buddha's teaching here, that although we are, the deeds we do when we walk 10 steps, well, it's too late. You can't, pray it away. You can't wash it away. Once you've walked there, you've walked there. But the results of that, how your karma, the deeds that you do, how it manifests in your life, and the new types of deeds that you do, those can be changed, right? And so we can always, look when our mind, as we go through our day, always remember, how can we make our mind more expansive and inclusive, more like space, more like water than stone, right? More like a healthy, soothing balm instead of an open wound. So how can we include? So developing that mindfulness, sometimes just taking a step back and just, taking a few moments to develop that equanimity, that balance, that impartiality, and develop some loving kindness towards ourselves and all beings. That can really help expand the mind even just a little bit throughout the day, and then developing this practice even more to experience the benefits that the Buddha is speaking about here. So sadhu for listening, and at this time I will go ahead and answer some questions, and then we'll close for the morning. So we can close and respect the sutta with 3 sadhus before we turn to those. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Okay. And we have hellos from more. Also hello from Megan Olden. Hello, this is my mom. Hello, Mom. Hope you're having a good morning. Okay, so Sud says, Buddha also includes the other Brahmaviharas along with metta, but how can one develop both upekkha and metta together? It seems metta is so caring. In upekkha, we say all beings are the owners of their karma. Yeah, good question, Sud. I think that I answered this partially with when I mentioned upekkha after your question came up, right? That actually we have to have upekkha for metta, because otherwise our metta would be partial. So upekkha is not supposed to be cold. It's important not to confuse equipoise or equanimity with indifference, right? It doesn't mean indifference in the sense of a cold, not caring, like a sort of when people suffer being almost like you don't experience, you don't feel it, you don't even it's almost like a kind of dull, cold, barely recognizing. It's not a full recognition. But upekkha instead should come with a deep clarity, a deep understanding of like, wow, this really is powerful. Like, it's not like, oh, they're suffering and whatever, but rather it's like, it recognizes the power of suffering, the pain of suffering, but it doesn't get caught up in it. It's cool and balanced. And so actually we have to have upekkha in order to develop perfect metta. Otherwise our metta will always be shaken by the suffering or by the hatred that we experience or by the grudges. So we have to be able to set that aside and say whether they treat me good or bad. You have to have that impartiality, that equipoise, that deep recognition of the nature of those things as impersonal and so on. And so upekkha is actually supposed to be cooling. And upekkha then, just upekkha in and of itself, it should manifest as an incredibly balanced mind, a mind which is completely unmoved and unshaken, not like a cold, impartial mind, right? So, for example, when the Buddha describes the 4th jhana, he says that it's characterized by upekha, without pleasure or pain. He says upekha satipari, just purity of equanimity and mindfulness. And then the fourth Brahmavihara is upekha, right? Boundless upekha. So the Buddha there is talking again about that quality of someone who develops a mind which has pure, unshakable equanimity. So it's closer to, I think that the Buddha is instructing us to develop a mind state which is more like that, right? Not like an impartial kind of going about your day without really caring. No, it's something much more deep that he's encouraging us to do, right? So I hope that answers your question to an extent. But yeah, in order for the other three, actually you have to have upekha. So by the time that you get to the fourth, you're just supposed to extract that universal principle and purify it, simplify the other three into the kind of through line, right? The consistent part of those other three was the equanimity. Okay, then HPD says, "Hi Bante, my uncle stole an apartment from, harassed us, and called my wife racial slurs. We both study Buddhism and decided that he is suffering, and suing him and calling the police on him wouldn't be the ideal thing." Let's say cut off. Thank you. Well, thank you for sharing, HPD. Yeah, I'm sure that was a very difficult circumstance. So, yeah, sometimes people, when they do that, of course, yeah, they are suffering, as you mentioned, right? So I hope that you're safe. That's important to protect your family as well, of course. But I'm really glad that you're able to work on letting that go and not holding those grudges. That's really, really wonderful. So thank you for sharing that. I hope that's encouraging to others as well. Okay, and Bhavani says, "Where is Bhante Sudhangshu?" Which I assume you don't mean Sud, the other Sudhangshu is here, but maybe you mean Sudaso. Bhante Sudaso is in Italy. Yeah, he's in Italy right now. So he should be back in July. Okay, and then Sud has another question. Says, "How many years does Buddha recommend we develop metta before turning the mind to insight to progress on the path?" Yes, well, the Buddha doesn't actually give, he doesn't give a time frame in that way, because someone could practice metta for one day and attain arahantship, and someone else could practice metta their whole life and barely experience the results, right? Because it matters how we practice. It's really the way that we practice with the amount of faith and energy, mindfulness, unification, and wisdom. Those are the 5 indriyas, right? The 5 faculties and powers. So the degree to which you have those, that's what it really affects it. So there's not a time frame, but so really what matters is measuring your progress in terms of your mind states, right? So another example of this is, for example, some people, they might count like how many repetitions of something they do or how many bows they do. But what matters is not really the count. It matters even if you do 10 bows. If your mind becomes more peaceful and powerful, that's better than doing 100,000 bows without getting any results. Of course, doing the repetitions is also good because you're building a habit. You're inclining your mind to do good. You're focusing your intentions. And sometimes that doesn't mean you should stop if you've done a lot and you don't get results. That means actually you are getting results, right? The focus, the determination, the persistence, those are all good results. So the same with metta meditation. Even if it's not going super well, keep practicing. But sometimes you have to take a step back and you have to start working on developing some insight even before you get deep meditation, because they go together, right? Like, for example, sometimes people can't let go of their anger because they take things so personally. So actually, if you reflect on non-self, then you can actually develop better metta because you'll take it less personally. You'll take their own actions less personally. Some people have a hard time developing anger because they don't understand how to work with wandering thoughts, or they don't understand how to train their mind and protect their mind from anger and irritation. So sometimes it requires developing some insight, right, into that process of, you have to look, how does anger arise? How does it cease? What are the conditions? How does my experience work? And so you have to develop some of that. And so you don't have to wait. What you do is you just try to develop them in tandem. Develop your loving kindness to the best of your ability. And then once you feel like you want to start working on something else, then start investigating that process of developing the meditation. And then once you get a little bit more clarity, start developing your loving kindness more and allow them to work together like that. Allow them to be a team rather than like two people racing each other, like who wins first, loving kindness or the, rather have them work together as a team. And Madeline is just expressing gratitude and talking about the benefits of an expansive mind. Yes, sadhu. And then Sud asks, would sensual desire and want for things also lessen with the practice of Brahma Viharas? And gratitude again, sadhu, Sud, for your listening and your attention. Really wonderful. All of the people joining in and listening to the Dhamma. So, would sensual desire and want for things also lessen? Yes, yes. So although metta is traditionally, we focus on the benefits of it for treating anger, actually it treats all 5 hindrances. And the same is true for any meditation, actually. So when we talk about meditations being like an antidote, what we mean is that they're particularly powerful for a strong defilement, but they treat all of them. So for example, breath meditation. Breath meditation is not known for its benefits with anger, right? Usually metta is recommended for that. Breath meditation, the Buddha recommends for having a wandering mind, for having, stilling and calming them. It's for peace. But actually, if you have anger, you can't meditate on your breath. It's also a hindrance to breath meditation. And if you have desire, also notice in the sutta, the Buddha says, without desire and without ill will. So it's actually without both, right? Without sensual desire. Because sensual desire is a limiting mind. To develop metta, you have to allow your mind to transcend the material, transcend the sensual. Remember that the Brahma Viharas, the rebirth for them is on the level of the Rupa realm, right? The realm of fine form, which is the realm above the sensual realm. The Brahma deities have no sensual desire. So in order to go to a Brahma heaven, even including in this life, like if you want to enter the state of a Brahma deity, the exact same mind state of the heavens, in order to do that, you have to have no desire. You have to have no sensuality, no ill will, and no of the other 5 hindrances. So yes, also sensual desire. So as you develop metta, your mind it'll start to transcend the small sensual desires and be nourished instead by the lack of desire, be nourished instead by the lack of reactivity, and instead by the expansiveness, which is inclusive. So yes, it will also lessen sensual desire. So they go together. Like sometimes you might need to work on lessening sensual desire to deepen your metta. And as you deepen your metta, it should help your sensual desire. So don't think it's only for anger. It's just that is the particularly powerful it's a particularly powerful antidote if you have strong anger. Like if you have anger, it might be hard to let go of if you just do breath meditation. So the anger might continue blocking your meditation progress. So then you do another meditation, which helps remove the anger. But all meditations, in order to be successful, they all involve removing all 5 hindrances. So yes. Okay, friends, so this time we are about out of time. So thank you everyone for joining. I hope that this was helpful for your practice and inspiring for your day. And at this time we can close with 3 more sadhus and then go off on our mornings or on your day, wherever you are and whenever you're watching this. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.